Hello everyone and welcome to the first of a number of bonus episodes for the Elder Scrolls II Daggerfall. So, if you followed along in the main series, we actually beat Daggerfall in the last episode, but we've actually not finished technically all the way with Daggerfall because there are still roughly, I think, 45-ish books that we have not read. So, over the course of these next number of bonus episodes, I believe it's probably going to be close to about 11 or 12, I would imagine, we are going to be finishing them up. Each bonus episode will contain 3 books, and then the final couple episodes, I would say, are going to contain 4, just to make sure we get through it with everything. And then after all of this is done, is going to be the review for Daggerfall. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get started with the first of our bonus episodes. King Edward, Part 7. So you saw a demon and killed a rat with Tooth. That's a fine ebony dagger, Tooth is. They're rare, so you want to take real good care of it, Myth said. I can't tell you about the blade, except it came from Morland's father. It's the one his brother sent him to repair just before he ran away. Would you like to hear about how they got the dragon's tooth that Matt's carved the hilt from? Edward nodded, caressing the curved hilt with its lightly carved intertwined roses, thorns, and leaves. It was well after supper, and everyone but him and Myth had left the fire for one reason or another. Aliera and Morland had gone for a walk hand in hand. Aliera holding Morland's newly healed left hand in both of hers. They'd laughed and shaken their head when he'd offered to come along. Not tonight, Aliera said. Go to sleep soon. We'll be leaving before dawn. Willow had gone to visit a high elf friend. Beach, Saas, Mats, and the Khajiit woman Silk had also gone off together laughing. They'd invited Myth to come along, but Myth had declined. Khajiits. They're all turning into a bunch of shameless Khajiits, Myth said. The short dark elf sat close to the glowing embers, knees to chest. His hair and eyes glowed in the dim light. If you're going to pair, you should pair, not turn it into an attorney. They'll be selling tickets next, but each to his own. Khajiits think we're weird because we like eating as a group. Silk says it put her right off her food at first, listening to everyone chew. Well, having a bunch of watchers puts me off, I suppose. You're too young for this kind of talk. Edward shrugged. It was a beautiful night, crisply cool, no moon, but the stars were very large and bright. Anyway, it was just a few months after Mats had joined up with us. We were up in Skyrim, traveling from town to town, just 3 kids, seeing the country a bit, picking up odd jobs where we could. Morland entered tournaments if we heard about them, but he wasn't winning that much, just about enough to cover healing him up afterwards. You can get beat up pretty bad fighting Skyrim style. That's without shielding spells or any other spells for that matter. No magic allowed, even if it isn't to the death. And he drew a few types that didn't mind seeing a little dark elf blood spilled in the sand, or a lot. And the crowds were against him at first. It can get pretty lonely in the arena, especially if you're beating the hometown favorite. And it's even worse if he's beating you. Mats and me would be the only ones for him, and sometimes we didn't dare cheer too loud. They'd look real funny at a Nord boy cheering a dark elf back then. Of course, Mats was so big, not many wanted to start anything with him. That was a long time ago. Morland's the favorite now if things get tough. Of course, the crowds will cheer for a good match, but hardly anyone really wants to see him lose now. They like seeing the best, even if it comes wrapped in dark elf hide. And when he walks into an arena, you know you're seeing the best. But what they'd like seeing a Nord, that's better. And Mats may get there soon. He doesn't fight his best against Morland, though. Maybe he doesn't want to, or maybe Morland just knows him too well. Oh well, you want to hear about the dragon. So Morland was gambling with this Nord in a tavern one night, trying to pick up a little easy gold. The pot's pretty big, and the man can't match his bet, so he says he'll put a map in the pile and tap Morland. It's a map to the hiding place of the best blade ever made. It says there's a spell on it, so that if you hit your opponent, you get as much heal as he gets hurt. That some mage hit it just before he died, so only someone worthy of it can get to it. And you think I look worthy, Morland says, grinning. We were young and dumb, but not all that dumb. The Nord grins back and says, I saw you fight Falkreath, kid. You look like you'd take a chance. Why not? The story alone is worth the gold. You ought to be a bard. So anyway, Morland wins the pot, tosses the man enough back to keep his throat wet all evening. Just for laughs, we look at the map. It showed the Dragon's Teeth Mountains down in Hammerfell. Real wild country. And there's an X and some writing that says Fang Lair. Mats gets excited and says he's heard of the place, but he never known just where it was. And you still don't, I say. Any fool can draw a map, just as any fool can look at one. I could do as much myself. Matt says Fanglair's an old dwarf mine, but there's supposed to be a dragon there now, and the dwarves are gone. Moreland looks real interested at the mention of a mine and asks what they mine there. Matt says mithril and gold. Moreland says, The mithril had him interested. We couldn't afford really good weapons, and mithril's scarce, but it's light to carry for its worth and easy to mine, and work if you know how, and he did. He didn't believe in the magic blade or the dragon, but he thought the mine might be real. Mining's in his blood, as it is in all of the Ra'atham, the royal kin of Ebonheart. He took us a couple of months to get there. We couldn't afford horses. We never would have found it without the map. It's tricky country, full of canyons and hidden valleys. We sure never expected what we saw when we did get there. You could see the towers from the canyon mouth way back in there. Dark elves live right in the caverns if they mine, but the dwarves had built a hall over the top of their mines. It's a pretty thing on the outside. Narrow towers and arched bridges between them. Delicate looking. You wouldn't expect work like that from the dwarves. Merged right into rocks, too. And there was a big stone dragon mounted above the gate. There's your dragon, Mats, I said. The inside wasn't much to look at, just rock wall. The doorway was enormous, but the doors were gone. There was a balcony running right around a big open pit. Probably the start of the mine, turned into a hall. And right in the middle was more treasure than you can imagine, piled up almost like a haystack that had been flattened out. And what had flattened it was a golden dragon curled right over it. We didn't even see him at first, because he blended with the rest of the gold. Well, we just froze in place. We hadn't seen a sign of live dragon outside. The place smelled of brimstone, but most mines do. And there, that dragon was, just lying there. And it's got to be 2 miles to any kind of shelter. I told you there was a dragon, Mats whispered. Shh, says Moreland. Look, what's in front of his nose? I've been busy looking at his nose, believe you me, but there was a sword lying right there, naked, sure enough, and the blade was dark metal that looked just like his dagger. You two start back, Moreland says. I'm going to try for that blade anyway. If that's not ebony, I'm a wood elf. Maybe the dragon's dead or asleep for the winter, or maybe it's not alive at all. Just something the dwarves made to guard their treasure, like the scarecrows the Nord farmers put in their grain fields. At worst, I'll distract him long enough for you to get clear. I don't mind to take him up on it, but Mats just shook his head, and I was kind of ashamed to go back alone. Let's all just clear out, I said. That thing looks real enough to scare me away, but Moreland casts invisibility and heads on down the stairs, not making a sound that even I could hear. I could see Mats hated letting him go down alone, but Mats couldn't sneak past the blind deaf beggar in a fish market. So we strung our bows and figured we could get off a couple of shots and maybe get lucky and take out the eyes of the dragon if it woke up, for Moreland. Mats and I move around to where we can get onto a tower stair fast if we have to, figuring the dragon can't get in there. Then we scrunch down and peer between the railings. Not that there was anything to see except the dragon laying there, which really is a lot to see at that. Then those dragon eyes popped open, and my heart gave one big jump and then seemed to quit entirely. Ah. Dinner comes to me today, the dragon says. Take a good look at my hoard, Dark Elf. You will not steal it, nor even view it long, but your bones will keep it company forever. I don't want your hoard, dragon, just a sword you guard. I'll trade you mine for it. Mine's bigger. I couldn't see Moreland, but his voice was coming from right near where the sword was, which was practically in the dragon's mouth. I get a meal and both swords. Why should I settle for just your poor sword? Let me pass and I'll get more gold from below. I have gold enough, the dragon yawned, and I thought he was going to swallow Moreland right then, but he turned his head away from us, too. Mats was looking to get a shot, but it was really dark in there for Nord eyes, and he was scared of hitting Moreland, since he couldn't locate him that well by sound. Of course, Moreland too smart to get between us and the dragon, but Mats wasn't smart enough to think that far along. Slavery dulls the wits in some ways. Matt says he hadn't been free very long. I could see well enough, and I could tell by sound exactly where Moreland was. But the shot was clean. But the shot was clean out of my range. The dragon goes on. But there is something you can do for me, elf, and prolong your life a few more minutes. Well, a few more minutes sounds pretty good just now, dragon. What would you ask of me? Moreland's voice sounded as calm and easy as he were asking if there would be rain tomorrow. He can keep his head in a tight spot, I'll give him that. I have a toothache. It's too far back for me to reach with my claws. Can't see it, elf? The dragon gapes his jaws to bare his teeth. Morland's invisibility spell wore off about then, and I could see him standing there, staring up into the cavern of a mouth. Lower your head a bit so I can get a good look. He puts out his hand and pulls the upper lip aside, cool as you please, and examines the inner gum carefully. Damnedest thing I ever saw. It's abscessed. Thy gum wants lancing, and the tooth should come out. I can lance it for you, if you trust me in there with a sword. And why should I trust you, Dark Elf? I hear no good of your kind. You must be spending too much time with the Nords, then. I wouldn't be able to kill you before you killed me. Why should I even try? Listen, I have some friends up above. Suppose they hunt you up a nice fat deer. I'll lance your gum, and you can let me go and eat the deer. Else you can just eat me now, toothache and all. What makes you think your friends will return once they're away? They're not very smart. I think for them, they'd be lost without me. Good hunting, guys. If they can't find a deer, is there anything else you'd like? Pig maybe, a few rabbits, nuts, berries? Hurry up, will you? But we had hand signals and his hand said to get out of there and stay out. I'd have been glad to. I mean, I'm fond of Morland, but I don't see my dying alongside would bring him any comfort. I'd have been glad to see him clear if it was me that was on the menu, and I figured he felt the same way. But that thick-skulled Nord wouldn't listen to me. Said if dying beside him was all we could do, then that's what we would do. Nord nonsense. Sounds good in a song, though. So we took a couple of hours getting the deer and headed back with it. I figured Morland was filling the dragon's belly by now, and the dragon would be happy to add a deer and another dark elf and a Nord to round out his day's rations. But Morland was still sitting there, chatting with the dragon. He didn't look that pleased to see us either. Told us to leave the deer and go, and he'd lance the abscess once we're away, but Matt says he's been thinking. Oh, brother, I thought. Mats doesn't think too often, and that's a good thing, really. He's decided that he can get a chain round the bad tooth, fasten down the end to the floor, and then the dragon can give it a good old yank himself. The dragon likes the idea, so Morland lances the abscess to take the swelling down to where the dragon can gulp the deer with some comfort, and then they rig up a chain and get the tooth out. Made a hell of a mess, that. Blood and pus everywhere, and Morland got us casting heal spells on this dragon to stop the bleeding and close up the wound. Very good. Well, alright, Morland, you've proven yourself. Take the sword and go. Morland looks at him. You mean this was some kind of test, he says? How long have you had that toothache? Long indeed, as you measure time, mortal, yet not very long at all for dragonkind. Hear my story, then. A scraggly young mage came along, hoping to steal my gold. I caught him at it. We had an increasing harsh words, and he attempted a spell aimed at me. His pitiful spell affected me little, and I killed him, but, The dragon looked away briefly, then resumed his tale. The little runt had apparently cast a homemade curse spell upon himself, and when I crunched him, the dragon scowled fiercely, remembering, then continued. Anyway, the ache only came on bad when someone came along to try for the sword. The sharpest pain went away if I ate the intruder, but I usually didn't, though. I've singed a few in self-defense, wafted a bit of fire, and most of them fled. Deer are plentiful. There is something, unpleasant about eating someone you've talked to. The greasy mage gave me indigestion for days, cramps and runny bowels, and too much gas even for a dragon. So that toothache never did completely go away, and the people who've come along haven't been very pleasant either. All in all, one of the most unpleasant stretches of my life. I couldn't stay away from the vicinity of the sword for very long, of course, part of the curse. We could stay on for a while if you like. We're good company. I'm Morland. My red-headed friend is Myth, and the big guy is Mats. I'd still like to look for Mithril below, and I've never had a dragon friend before. I might like that. You have good friends, and even though you have said that you must do the thinking for them, I think that they can do some thinking on their own, and it would appear that they've decided that you are a worthwhile fellow. The dragon hesitated for a second, and actually managed to look shy. You can call me Akatosh. Oh, Akatosh, okay. So we stayed for a couple of weeks, hunted with the dragon. Now that was an experience. Searched the mines, didn't find much down there, but the dragon gave us the jewels from his hoard. Said he only needed the metal. They absorb it into their scales while they lie on it. So we did pretty well out of it after all. Morland tried to give Mats the sword, claimed that he'd have sure tried to kill the dragon if we hadn't come back, and would have been toasted, but Mats wouldn't take it. Said the dragon gave it to Morland, so that was clearly who was supposed to get it. Mats took the tooth, but he made the hilt you've got now and gave Morlin that too. Told me he'd never had anything worth giving him before, and it made him feel good. He's real pleased Morlin chose to give it to you. I think Matt should have got the sword, Edward said. He didn't try to steal anything. It was really brave of him to come back, even when he didn't think it'd do any good. Morlin tried to steal, got caught, and then just tried to walk his way out of it. You could all have been killed because of him. That's just what Morlin said. Well, Matt likes the big axe of his better... Matt likes that big axe of his better than a blade anyway, Edward sighed. I wish I was brave like Matt's. I guess I'm more like you. Morlin's voice sounded behind him, startling the boy, tart-tongued like Myth no matter. I'll be well pleased if you're as brave as Myth, and if once I'm gone they say no more of me, then he did what he had to do, my spirit will be at peace. And that was King Edward, Part 7. King Edward, Part 8. Wilderland. The journey through Valenwood was pleasant. The weather held fair for the most part, with sunny days and cool nights. Bright leaves of scarlet, crimson, gold, and green drifted down to form a carpet beneath their horses' feet. Valenwood was very different from the somber, steep forests of High Rock. When they reached the northern border, Edward looked back, saw that the trees were mostly bare, shorn of their glory. Before them lay a wide green land of rolling hills with only a few stands of trees. It seemed to spread on forever. This is Wilderland, Edward, Morlin said. Be on your guard. It seems a pleasant land, but no king's writ runs here. Each man's hand is against every other's, and there are worse than men. All the races of Tamriel meet here and clash, save thine, perhaps. They journeyed for some days more with small incident, save one for a band of Khajiit raiders that crept up on their camp by night. These were easily repelled. Silk slew one, and the rest ran off yowling. The gentle wood elf girl Willow lobbed fireballs after them. There were no roads, just small paths that crisscrossed one another and seemingly led nowhere. After 2 weeks of steady riding, they came to a bowl-shaped place in the hills where the land was tilled. The fields looked fair and were stacked with harvest, but the folks were dispirited, ragged, and unfriendly. Questions about inns got only shrugs and puzzled looks. Armed bands challenged them at times and demanded to know their business. When Morlin said they were bound for Morrowind, they were told to pass through quickly, and mind they stole nothing. Passage is all we wish, Morlin said quietly. Someone should teach those folks manners. The usually placid Mats growled. Thou mayest stay and open a school of etiquette if it pleases thee, Morlin said. I fear my life's too short to teach the lessons these villains require. Still, I like not the look of the sky. It looks even more evil than the folk. I think we'll try our luck in the town. The town was surrounded by a palisade of wood and had a stout gate. Guards looked them over and refused them entrance. None but humans enter here, elf. Take thy rabble and be gone. I see, Ali, Mats, Edward, thou seems to qualify for the hospitality here. Rest of us will shelter elsewhere. Aliera announced that she would see them all blown back to first hold by the storm before she'd step within these gates. So they circled the town, passing a moat with stone walls within and a keep of some sort within that. A track north took them past a small house with a large barn nearby. Both looked in poor repair, but Morlin sent Aliera and Edward to knock on the door and ask if they might sleep in the barn. The rest waited in the road. An elderly woman answered their knock. She looked pleased to see them. Stay? Aye, I'd be glad of the company. No need to sleep in the barn, though, lady. I've a room to spare. My name's Ora Ingalls Dutter. Aliera gestured toward the waiting companions. The woman squinted towards them. Thy man's there, and some friends. Aye, we'll all squeeze together then. 'Twill be warmer, so I've a pot of soup on the fire. Made it to last me a week, but you're welcome to it. I can make more. My husband's an elf. Is he so? Who's to take good care of thee and thy son? Thou's fat as pigs. Bring them in. I wish my granddaughter had such a one to care for her. Ora refused payment, saying that she was not yet at such a pass that her guests must pay for her hospitality. She said tales and songs and an evening's merriment would be payment enough. Pots and dishes were set out to catch the worst of the leaks. She knew them all well. They gathered around the hearth and made a very merry while the storm raged. banging the shutters and doors and threatening to blow the roof away altogether. "Tell me, my lady," Aura whispered apart to Aliera. "He's truly good to thee? He's so big and black." "Truly good," Aliera said, keeping her mouth serious while her eyes laughed. "Aye, 'tis well. Then, he put me in a bit of a mind of our baron, who's big and dark. Oh, not so dark as thy elf. He took my granddaughter, Karen, and he does not treat her well. He hurts her, my lady. She dare not run away. Where would she go?" Tears gathered in Aura's eyes and followed worn familiar tracks down her cheeks. When their hostess had gone to sleep in her room, Aliera repeated what she had been told. "Let's rescue the girl," Beach said. "We grow stale with inaction." "Aye," said Silk and Willow at once. Mats growled in agreement. Myth and Saas looked interested. Morlund looked doubtful. "We cannot right every wrong in Tamriel. This baron offers his folks a shelter of a kind. They could leave if they'd like. It's better outside." "Aye," Myth said. "He keeps the bandits off so he may rob the folks at leisure. And we pull him down. There'll be another to take his place, or else the outside will come in and there'll be nothing left after all." "Nothing would be better than this filthy something," Matt said. "There's that." The storm seemed to have moved away. Aliera went to the door and stared up into the sky, where clouds raced past the eastern moon. A single large brilliant blue star hung near the moon. "Zenithar hangs near Tamriel tonight, Morlund. I'd thought to mend her roofs tomorrow, if it's fair," he said as she returned to the fireside. "We'll do so much, at least. As for the rest, Aliera, she asked for my help in a way, and I think I hear Zenithar's voice in the wind, and I feel his hand in the rain on this night. Thy quest, then, wife." Aliera nodded, unsmiling. She curled up with Morlund in the chimney corner, and they whispered and laughed together for a while. Edward fell asleep. In the morning, he was sent up on the roof to help Beach and Willow place new shingles. Morlund wrote a letter which he gave to Mats, telling him to take it to the Baron, to arrive at the castle around dinner time, and to go afoot. "You're going to challenge him for the girl," Edward grinned. "But will he fight? And wouldn't he take her back again once we're gone?" "Since he wouldn't let me in his town, thy mother thought to invite him to our house instead." Morlund stamped the letter with his sealing ring and handed it to Mats. "Oh, it's a long way to your house still, isn't it?" Edward felt a bit disappointment that no rescue seemed imminent, but he supposed it really was not reasonable to expect 8 people to take a keep, even if they were Morlund's companions. Probably the songs exaggerated their deeds. Morlund grinned, ruffled Edward's hair, and told him to cease his question, get up on the roof, and mind his mother. Morlund and Myth set off together on foot. Aliera said they were going hunting. They did not return even at supper time. Aliera told Edward not to worry, they'd meet later. It was well after sundown when she bid their hostess farewell. They took all the horses with them and left them in a grove near the north wall of the keep. Near north wall of the keep. Aliera asked Edward if she wanted to wait for them with the horses. Edward asked where they were going. "We have to enter the keep to get Aura's grandchild out. No questions, Edward. If you're coming, then stay with me and do exactly as I say. Levitate across the moat. I must swim. Once across, we'll scale the wall. Once inside, just follow me and be as silent as you can." Edward gaped at his mother and the other companions. How could the 6 of them possibly storm a keep? 3 women, 2 men, and a boy. There would be guards up on the wall and a lot more inside. Mats would be inside too, though he guessed. But where were Morlund and Myth? There were fearsome things in the moat. Edward began a protest, then thought better of it. Saas slid into the moat first. There was some splashing and hissing, then the water went quiet. Aliera entered the water, the others levitated. "Here's the ropes," Beach said, feeling along the wall. There were 3 ropes. Edward, Beach, and Saas went up first. Aliera, Willow, and Silk followed. Morlund and Myth were waiting above. 2 guards were snoring softly, and "How?" Edward began, and found his mother's hand clapped over his mouth. A guard from another wall section called out, and Edward's heart stopped beating. Myth called something back to him, and tramping footsteps moved away. The companions went silently down the stairs and slipped across the yard like shadows. There was no guard on the door to the keep itself. Inside, the passages were eerily quiet. They stopped at an imposing door and flattened themselves against the wall beside it. They could hear voices within. A thin, chilling wail sounded and died away. Morlin whistled a snatch of a song into the silence that followed. The door swung open and they raced inside, falling on the startled guards like furies. Edward was last inside, tooth in his hand. He stabbed the nearest guard in the side, and Beach finished him with a blow to the head. Mats had been inside. It was he who had opened the door. His axe clove the head of one guard and swung against the inner door. Aliera and Widow had barred the strong outer door. Morlin's opponent was a very young man. He'd taken one look at the big dark elf, dropped his sword, and fallen to his knees, praying for mercy. Morlin eyed him with disgust and said, "Greet Zenithar for me. Tell him Morland of Ebonheart commands you to his mercy. I have none for such as you." He slashed the young guard's throat. Blood sprayed over Morland's leathers. His victim fell over, gurgling horribly. A burning acid rose in Edward's throat. He swallowed hard and looked away. The guards inside the anteroom had been dispatched, but outside the door shouts and footfalls thundered, and there was a pounding on the door. Edward followed his mother into the inner chamber, which was empty save for a naked girl tied spread eagle on the enormous bed, her eyes starting from her head. The companions cut her free while Aliera caught her shoulders. "Thy grandmother sent us, child. Where's the bairn?" The girl pointed at a bookcase, then clung to Aliera. She was no bigger than Edward, and seemed not much older. Her breasts were just beginning. She was covered with welts and blood and purple-yellow bruises. Aliera flung her coat over the girl. Beach picked her up. Myth's fingers were feeling over the bookcase. There was a click and a section slid aside. He went through cautiously. The others followed, and the secret door closed after them. "I think it's just a bolt hole," Myth said, "but there'll be traps, no doubt." "Go warily then, friend," Aliera said. "There's no hurry. I think the Baron plans to show his departing guests the door, as a good host should." A narrow passage opened to the left. Myth sent a bolt of light down it. The floor was littered with bones, human bones. Small skulls stared eyelessly. "I'm going to enjoy killing him," Morland said. "No," Aliera protested. "My quest, my kill." Morland swung his face to her. "Aliera, I want it sung that he died by Aliera's hand. I claim my right to face him king. Leave him to me, and we'll sing it your way. He's twice your size. Do you want to fight me for the right?" The elf leaned over her, a full head taller. "If I must." Aliera brushed past him, slinging her shield on her arm, and drawing her short sword as she ran. Morland grabbed at her, missed, and ran after her. His size hampered him in the low, narrow passage. Sparks flew from his spell shield as he caroomed recklessly off the walls. Come on, you two," Myth yelled from ahead. "I'm not promising to save him from you." "Morland," Edward gasped, running after him. "You're not going to let her?" "Let her? How do you suppose I stop her? I'm open to suggestion, short of actually fighting her myself." He seemed half angry, half amused. "But maybe he's gone by now." "Nay, he's locked in here with us. We found the exit earlier from the outside, and Myth set a lock the Baron will not undo." "We'll paralyze her. We can carry her. She's activated a shield. It reflects spells, among other things. I'd only paralyze myself, and I'd be inconvenient to carry. She'll be all right. It's an excellent shield. It casts a very powerful protective spell. Eric himself devised it." Having a spot of trouble with the locks tonight, Baron, Myth's voice came clearly from ahead. They emerged into a larger space where the Baron had been clawing vainly at switches beside a massive door. "Shoddy work. You should get another smith." "He won't be needing one," Aliera snarled. The companions spread around her in a semicircle. The Baron set his back to the door and set himself in a fighting stance. He was a big man, as big as Matt's, and he was holding an axe as big as the one Matt's wielded, and wearing a breastplate and helm. He addressed Morland. 9 against 1. I'd expect odds like that from you black devils." Morland was at the back of the group, yet the Baron had singled him out as the leader. People did somehow. "You prefer the advantage of weight, do you not? But my wife wants you to herself. She cannot resist your charms, it seems, nor can I. I could not wait for you to respond to my invitation, so I came to you instead. I beat her, and the rest of you kill me? Ha! I might be worth it, at that," he added, staring at Aliera with cold, dark eyes. Aliera smiled a troubled smile. Her dark hair swung free about her shoulders, and she seemed to glow. "You will not beat this woman, Baron, but if you do, then you go free. You are mine alone tonight. Swear it all by Zenithar. If he haps to kill me, my ghost will hound him to his grave and beyond." She sounded rather pleased at the prospect. Edward began to shiver. By Zenithar. The Baron laughed. I don't believe you, but one last female for my collection, then. Are you so worried of her, elf? Are you so afraid of her that you'd rather face me instead? Somewhere deep in his mind, Edward realized that the elf was right. Despite the Baron's bravado, he was afraid of Aliera. Edward hadn't sworn with the others. He clutches his staff tightly, but his feet seemed rooted to the floor. The Baron laughed again and swung a mighty blow at Aliera in answer, but it deflected harmlessly off her shield. His eyes widened, and he realized she was spell shielded. Aliera danced aside and cut his arm. She was nimble, but he managed to land many blows. If her shield went, Edward did not finish the thought. But he was leaving himself somewhat open in the hopes of wearing her shield down, and she was scoring hits against his limbs. She kept her blows low, trying to cost him the use of his legs and draining him of blood. All the while she taunted him about his manhood, saying she would geld him where he died. A great blow knocked her back, her shield flashed and was gone. The Baron raised his axe high to cleave her skull with a single blow. Her arm drew back, and she threw her slender short sword straight into her enemy's eye. He dropped the axe and fell screaming to his knees, hands clawing at his face. Aliera stepped forward and thrust the sword home, piercing deep within the brain. The body fell over, twitching and jerking. Well fought, wife. I had a master trainer and a better armorer, Aliera laughed when she threw back her head and shouted wordlessly in triumph, raising her arms, fists clenched. That you did. Morland grabbed Silk in a rough hug and kissed her noisily. It's a neat trick you taught her, Silk. I'll thank you to cease flirting with my trainer husband, Aliera said, wiping her slender adamantium blade carefully. Me? Flirt? Not while thy blood's up and thy shield's still charged. I'm just thanking her. I'll kiss Eric, too, when I see him. Is he truly dead? Karen had clung to Beach throughout the fight with her eyes closed. Now she regarded Aliera with awe. Edward thought was the right word. Edward felt something of the same, although it was akin to horror. Dead enough, Aliera said, regarding the still faintly twitching form with satisfaction. The girl drew closer, then knelt beside him. She picked up a stone and smashed it into his face again and again, sobbing. When she had done, Saas cast some healing spells on her. Mython locked the door. They'd come out quite near to where they had left the horses. They took the girl back to her mother's house and left her there, instructing her to tell anyone that ventured to molest her that Zenithar's servants would return if she were harmed. The bewildered old woman clasped her granddaughter to her, and she bade them farewell. She whispered to Aliera to look after that man of hers. Oh, I do, Aliera said. I do. When they stopped for rest, Aliera came over to Edward to talk to him, but he protested that he was very tired and just wanted to sleep. Morland tugged her away, saying that if her son did not need her, then she could see to her man, who did. They moved out of the circle of firelight. Edward lay wakeful, listening to the small, stifled sounds. That was not unusual. It had troubled him at first. I can't sleep. You're too noisy, he protested one night. What are you doing anyway? That had drawn giggles from the companions. Can't you at least pretend you're sleeping? Morland had asked, plaintively. Now, I know why dark elves seldom have more than one child. What I do not understand is how humans manage to get so many. Morland and Aliera had come back to lie by him that night, but after that he had pretended to sleep, like the others. And the noises were too familiar now to keep images of the night adventure from flashing through his mind, as vivid as if they were happening again in truth. He could feel his Daedra feeding and could not stop it. It wasn't just fair, he thought, but now he was beginning to see what Morland meant by feeding his Daedra and yet walking with the gods, with Zenithar. Morland came back carrying Aliera. He set her gently down, then stretched himself out between Edward and her. It must be difficult being a woman, he said softly. It was hard watching her, just watching. Edward nodded. I have asked it often enough of her, Morland continued. She told me how hard it is, but I never knew until tonight. I knew she'd win. Zenithar was with her, and all that Baron had was his Daedra, and still it was very hard to watch. She makes the cast 9 tries out of 10. She makes that cast 9 tries out of 10, and there were more uses of the shield if missed. He'd have dropped of exhaustion before it wore out entirely. I keep thinking about it too, and the guard he asked for mercy. I know, and yet he listened to that night after night, and still he remained the Baron's man. Most men are not as strong as you. Maybe he couldn't help himself. Why was he pleading Why was he pleading for a man already dead? His mind kept replaying the night's events as if they might yet come out different, for better or for worse. Even to witness evil such as that corrupts the soul. To watch and do nothing. Mats would have stayed my hand had he been there. Anything but worth keeping. And it's worse for the young. I am sorry you had to pass through this night. Is my soul corrupted now? You feel the acid's bite, as do we all, but you'll heal. Can you heal me now? Aye. Morland gathered the boy in his arms, then rolled over so that Edward lay between his parents. Aliera put her arms round him without really waking. Her strong woman's smell mingled with Morland's musky dark spice odor in Edward's nostrils. She was so angry, Edward whispered. He'd wondered if he would ever really feel the same toward her again, and yet her arms were still as comforting as before. Maybe Morland had needed the reassurance, and had been wise enough to ask for it. She's a woman. That sort of injury to another touches her near, he said. How near? The boy looked at the question he dared not put. Thy father's not a monster, but she was wed to a man who did not care for her, and she could not leave him. It's a common enough among thy race, which makes it none the easier to bear, I think. She has a danger too, then, Edward asked sadly. You must speak with her about that. It really wasn't a fair fight. Her shielded, not him. Fair fighting's for the arena, boy. Would you fight a wolf or hellhound without weapon, spell, or armor, though they have none? I would not. What will become of Karen and Aura and the other folk now that the Baron's dead? Do I look like the prophet Maruk? How should I know? We can stop here in the spring and see what has been planted in the field we burned tonight. I've no mind to stay and plow it. I've my own fields to tend. Listen to me. I sound like a Nord farmer. Mines to dig is more like it. He yawned. The others did not think about afterwards. You did. I'm a king. It's what we do. And that was a very lengthy King Edward Part 8. King Edward Part 9. Luck. Edward knelt behind Morland, leaning over his shoulder so that he could see the cards the elf held. He was sitting away from the fire, so it was dark for human eyes, but Morland was the only one of the group who could allow Edward to see his hand. The other players, Beach, Myth, and Mats, said Edward brought them bad luck. Morland said that it was not really a question of luck, but that their hands were reflected in Edward's face for those that had the eyes to see such images. It was too dark for Beach and Mats to see Edward's now, and Morland blocked him from Myth's view. And yet the pile of coins in front of Morland had grown smaller since Edward had taken a place behind him. This time he had been dealt a good hand. Edward could see that. It was Matt's turn. He was cogitating. You're shivering, son, Morland said. Have you no warmer clothing? We must find something for you. Here, come share my cloak, and then you can hold the cards if you like. The wind was chill. There was a bite to it now, that they were farther north, and the year had grown older. Edward accepted the shelter of Morland's arms and warm fur coat, and sat close against his side. I think I'll just play the cards I hold, Matt said at last, and he pushed a pile of coins into the pot, then with sudden resolve added a few more. There. Throw the hand down, Edward. We're through. But there aren't many better hands than what we got, Edward protested. Edward, Morland growled. Well, how am I supposed to learn? Mats didn't have to show his cards unless they matched his bet. By watching. Silent. Oh, very well. No one ever told me that fatherhood came cheaply. He shoved most of his coins into his pot to match Matt's bet, and Edward laid his hand down. Ah, Matt said. You needn't do that, my friend. I'll show you the boy my cards for free. You filthy Nord, Morland said in disgust. Put down your cards and take my gold. If you can beat my hand, let's see if I'm the one who needs educating on how to play this game. You don't, Matt's grinned. Except that you could have accepted my generous offer instead of throwing an insult at me. Mats laid down the perfect hand called a lady's. A taunt like that rates an insult, Mats. That hand is almost worth the viewing price. 5 beautiful ladies. You don't see them together every day. They're not that fond of one another's company. How'd you know? Edward demanded. That'd be telling, Morland grinned. Some things you're supposed to learn for yourself. That's part of the game. But remember that a good hand's worthless if someone else holds a better. I'm sorry, Edward looked ruefully at the few remaining coins. No matter, it's foolish to play with Mats on those nights when the god of luck himself stands at his shoulder, and all that I have at mine is a runaway Breton prince who should be in his bed. He'd have had the money off me in the end. This way, we'll get a bit of sleep. Spoil sport, Matt's grumped. It's not every night Sai visits me, and I do enjoy his presence. He can leave as quickly as he comes. Sai's not someone you want to get over fond of, Matt's. Who should know that better than I? Nay, do not apologize. I appreciate your concern for me, my friend. It's not altogether unwarranted, but I am mindful of the temptation. I know how undependable Sai's favor is and how capricious. I play only among my friends, whom I do trust. Good night, then, Morlin, and Myth went off to join those who were already asleep, leaving Mats and Beach and Edward by the fire. The Dark Elf's natural sleep pattern was a period of 5 or 6 hours during the day and a short nap of 2 or 3 hours after midnight. Now that they were traveling, they were sleeping only at night, which was a different adjustment for Myth and Morlin, who had to use spells to cope with it. Edward had slept a bit as soon as they had stopped for the night, while the others prepared supper. In consequence, he was now wide awake. Beach was yawning. Matt seemed to require less sleep than the rest. Tell me about Sai, Mats. I've never heard of him before. I don't know. I didn't know there was a god of luck. I thought luck just happened. Being as you're a Breton, I can understand that. Bretons like things explained, clear and reasonable in sequence, so one thing follows from another, and you know where you are. Most gods are like that. They lay down rules, and if you obey them and pay homage to the god, why then he or she grants you favor. And the better you keep the rules, and the more you worship the god, the higher you rise in his favor. Those rules aren't always easy to keep. One god's rules may require you to violate another's, but you know where you are. Well, Sai's not like that. He's not a Daedra, but he's got a Daedric side to him for sure. One thing, if you worship him too much, he'll abandon you altogether. They call it Sai's affliction. It's an overwhelming desire for the god's constant presence. My father suffered from it, poor man. The disease is more than just a desire for the god's presence. The sufferers require continual proof of the god's favor, so they gamble incessantly. Not to win, for all they do is winning. For all they do with the winnings is keep on gambling until they lose. Then they do what they must to raise a stake so they can gamble again. Oh, it's a terrible thing. Terrible. My father sold me as a slave because of it. Later he sold my oldest sister. Then, when he was in debt again, he killed himself in one of his rare lucid moments when he could see what was happening to him. What he was doing to his family, himself. Of course, I was just a kid when I was sold. I didn't understand. I thought it was because of some fault of mine and I'd been sent away, laziness or stupidity or disobedience, and that if I'd only been a better son, it wouldn't have happened. That's Oriel's way. It's intended that children should respect their parents and learn from them, but some parents aren't deserving of respect. Well, it was a sickness in him, so my mother says. I don't know that he should be blamed for it, any more than if he had red plague or leprosy. I believe her, yet sometimes I still feel it was my fault. Well, that was bad luck, you might say, but Sai sent me Moorland, and that was a lucky day indeed. What other god would put it into his head to stop one human from beating on another? Any other elf in Tamriel would have turned away in disgust or stopped to watch and laugh at stupid humans. 2 dark elf kids against 4 grown Nords, and for all they knew, I deserved what I was getting. I could have been a thief or a murderer. I suppose I was a thief. I'd stolen myself, so to speak. Morlin can't say himself why he did it. He says he was spoiling for a fight that day, and seeing slave catchers on Morrowind soil did nothing to ease his temper. That's why I say it was Sai. It was Morlin that listened to the god. There's no doubt it's a grand thing to feel Sai's hand on your shoulder. It's like riding the finest horse, like love itself. You're one with the world and everything goes your way, everything's on your side. Instead of being the constant struggle that life really is, you don't have to be smart or handsome or kind or witty. Things just go your way. If you do something dumb, it doesn't matter. It'll turn out to be the right thing to have done. Lucky. Some folks do seem to be more lucky, others unlucky. I don't know why. Most everyone feels Sai's presence sometimes, I guess. You have, haven't you? Edward shook his head. He'd no idea what Mats was talking about. Well, it's a kind of breed, I guess, this Sai's affliction. You see, there's only so much luck to be spread around, and if a few folks got it all, there'd be none left for the rest, like tonight. I won that last pot, but the others had to lose it. Everyone can't win with Sai. That's not true with other gods, not necessarily. You still don't understand, do you? Would you like to hear a story about Sai? Edward nodded. Mats was a good-natured fellow, but usually quite silent. Edward had thought him rather stupid. Mat's luck of cards seemed to seemed to have loosened his tongue, and now Edward saw that he thought a lot more than he talked. Long, long ago, when people were fewer and wolves more numerous than now, a young widow named Josiah lived smack in the middle of what is now the province of Skyrim. She was an ordinary sort of woman, neither plain nor pretty. She had smooth brown hair, warm brown eyes, a short nose, a full round face, and a body to match. She had been born the only child of a peasant farmers. Her parents had been carried off by typhoid when she was 17. Shortly afterwards, she had married Tom, a strong young woodcutter with a cheerful disposition and roving eye. He'd gotten her pregnant quickly, then turned his attention elsewhere. Short before the babe was due, he'd been killed by the local goldsmith, who'd come home unexpectedly, found the handsome woodcutter in bed with his wife, and stuck a knife in his back. Tom's death had occurred on Heart's Day. The babe, a boy, was born 4 months later, during mid-year. 2 neighbor women came to help her birth him, and one stayed a few days. After that, she was left to cope with caring for a child in small holding as best she could. One evening in the next morning star, Josiah went out to the small barn to do the evening chores, leaving the babe asleep in his crib. The wind was howling. She had to clutch her cloak tightly around her. She milked and fed the cows, fed the pigs and chickens. When she left the barn, she walked out into a fierce blizzard. The wind had risen so that the barn door was wrenched from her hand and slammed back against the side of the barn. She couldn't even see the house, which was near the road and some distance from the barn, but she set off towards it with confidence. She'd lived there all her life and knew every inch of the ground, although she'd never seen a storm quite this fierce and sudden. Already there were 2 inches of snow beneath her feet. She struggled against the wind for some time, until at last she realized that she must somehow have gone past the house, turned back, and tried to follow her own footprints, reasoning that at least she'd warm herself in the barn before setting out again. But the snow was falling so thickly that her footprints vanished before her eyes, and she was quite lost and cold. Josiah struggled on, hoping to come across something recognizable, a boulder or a tree or a road, if not a house or barn. Her hands and feet were wet and numb. She hadn't dressed heavily and was now chilled to the bone, the ice forming on her eyebrows and lashes. "Timmy! Timmy!" she cried out her child's name, hoping against the hope that the babe would wake and cry and that she might follow the sound to him. She stood and listened, gasping the cold air into her lungs, but there was only the howling of the wind. The wind or something more. A gray shape took form in front of her, staring at her with slitted yellow eyes, a great gray wolf. Her heart seemed to stop. Her eyes filled with tears as she thought of her child lying helplessly in the house alone and his mother dead outside. How unlucky to die so close to shelter. Unlucky. But she had always been unlucky, the unluckiest woman ever she knew. It might be days before any thought to visit her. She sank down to her knees exhausted. The wolf sat before her, threw back his head, and voiced its dreadful howl. Her frozen hands scrabbled in the snow, looking for a stone or stick, anything with which to defend herself against the pack. Another dark shadow appeared from the whirring white snow. She scrambled backwards in a panic. This one was also gray, but tall and two-legged, gray-cloaked and hooded. Its gloved hand reached for her, the wolf's head, and patted it. Her scream died in her throat. "No need to fear, lass. Will not bring you harm, nay, quite otherwise. Be you the mother of your child?" She nodded dumbly. His voice was deep and kind, clear in the high whistling of the wind, but her eyes went to his dread companion. "No need to fear," he repeated. "My friend Grelin here will lead us back to safety, unless you indeed do wish to spend the night here." His hand reached for hers and pulled her up, and she leaned on his arm and hobbled alongside him. When at last they reached her door, she said, "I stopped here, hoping for shelter from the storm. I hope you don't mind." How could she refuse? Men too could be wolves, but if he were it, wasn't likely he'd take no for an answer. Please come in. I left the kettle on the boil, but I expect it's empty by now," she said inanely. I did go in, when there was no response to my knock, and found the babe asleep and alone, and the kettle boiling away. I took the kettle from the fire, but left the babe be. I knew his mother would not fare, and sent Grelin to find you. Lucky for you, but then I've always brought luck to those around. He threw back his hood, and she saw he was tall and pale, silver hair and eyes, but a young face. His countenance was grim, but the silver eyes were kind and his mouth gentle. "My horse, too, will want shelter on this night. Have you a shed to offer him?" While he stabled his horse, she changed out of her wet clothes and fixed a bit of supper for them, soup and bread and cheese and elm root tea. and she dished it up. She apologized meekly for the meager fare. "Why, 'tis a feast compared to my efforts," he smiled, and fell to, hungrily. Relin laid by his fire, his eyes fixed on his master, who occasionally flung him a morsel. "He ate well yesterday. Lucky for your chickens, else I'd have to buy one from you." "Nay, nay," she protested. "I'm deep in your debt, and I'm glad to share anything I have with you." Babe stirred and cried, and then she picked him up, changed his wet diaper, and put him to her breast. "Where's your husband, lady?" She hesitated a moment. The thought flashed that she should not tell this stranger how alone and unprotected she was, then told him the truth. "A sad tale, truly," he said. "But he's left you a handsome child, and you seem quite comfortable here." His eyes went around the humble one-room cottage, crib and feather bed at one end, covered with a quilt of her mother's making and stone hearth at the other, table and chairs made by her father in the middle. A ladder led to the loft where she had slept as a child. Suddenly the simple room seemed a palace to her. They were warm and dry and well fed, and indeed, what could be better? "Why, you're right, stranger. I am lucky after all. Now, will you tell me something of yourself?" "I am less fortunate than you in some ways. I'm a wanderer, and born to wanderers, a tinker by trade, though I can turn my hand to most things. I've never been married and have no children, nor have I ever had a home other than the wagon my horse pulls. I've never stayed long in any one place. My parents named me Sai. Most folks call me Lucky." "Lucky is what I will call you then, for you have indeed been lucky to me." He stood and stretched and began clearing the remnants of their meals from the table. He poured water from the copper kettle into the basin and washed and dried the dishes, something she had never seen a man do before. After the babe was fed, and they played with him on the hearthrug, while he told her of some of the odd and wonderful places and people he had met while on his journeys. Once again, her life seemed very narrow and dull. After an hour or two, the babe grew tired and cranky, and she took him on her lap and sung to him until he fell asleep. She laid him in his crib and wrapped him warmly in a rabbit fur bunting. When she was back to the fire, Lucky reached for her hand and held it a moment. Without a word, then they were in one another's arms, kissing hungrily. They shed their clothing and lay together shamelessly, enjoying each other's bodies in the flickering rosy firelight. He loved the roundness of her breasts and thighs, belly and buttocks, and said she was as juicy as an apple. His bleached, lean, muscular body and silken hair fascinated her as much. She had loved Tom and known pleasant moments with him, but nothing like she felt with this stranger. She woke in bed in the morning to the baby's crying as usual. Lucky wasn't there, and she thought he must have been a vivid dream. Then the door opened and shut, and he was striding toward her, fully dressed, and motioning her to stay where she was. He kissed her lips, then brought the babe to her and stood watching as he suckled. What a pity that we remember not the pleasure we once knew. "Yet we have pleasures still that we will remember," she said, and felt her cheeks redden at her boldness. What a wanton he must think her, he said, and laid his cold hand against her hot cheek. The storm had stopped during the night, but the snow was deep on the road, and it was clear that it could be days before the horse could pull Lucky's small wagon along the road. That wagon was brightly painted with leaves and vines and flowers in red and blue and green and yellow. The wheels were red with yellow spokes. It had a canvas top, also painted blue, with fancy fleecy clouds. Josiah loved the wagon, but it sorted oddly with Lucky's quiet radiance. Lucky did a small job for her, mending tools, hinges, and utensils, cut more wood for her, saying that if she did not need it this year, there would be another. He stayed a week, and a thaw came, and then a freeze, and the roads was rutted but fit for travel. They looked at one another in the morning light, and he said that it couldn't hurt to stay another day, or maybe two, if she was not yet tired of him. She wasn't. After another week, Lucky asked her if she would come with him. Her heart leaped at the question, but she looked round the little house where she spent all her life, thought of her land and village and her babe, and said, "I can't go. I've no desire to travel, and I don't want to bring my babe up as a homeless waif." Pain flashed across Lucky's pale face, but he only nodded, harnessed up his horse, and kissed her goodbye. Tears clouded her eyes and blurred the gay wagon colors. Sun's dawn passed very slowly, rain and sleet and snow, but nothing like the storm that had brought Lucky to her. Occasionally there was a knock at her door, which startled her heart. Pounding, but always it was just a villager, come to buy the dried herbs she sold. Then on the first night of first sea, she heard the creak of a wagon and knew. She flew to the door, her face alight, and flung herself into his arms. "I can't stay," he said. "I'm just passing through." And that was all that was and that was all the talking they did for quite a while. Spring came, and crocuses poked their noses up through the snow. Lucky spaded her upper garden. Curious neighbors came to call, but found out no more about him than she knew. She sold them eggs, her chickens were laying very well, and dried herbs, and an elixir she made from her grandmother's recipe, which was sovereign for headache and rheumatism. They hired Lucky for odd jobs despite their suspicion of him. Lucky continued to come and go, never saying where or when he'd be back, but he seldom stayed away for more than a few days. He spoke no words of love, but loved her fiercely all the same. Josea's round belly grew rounder, and she weaned Timmy to cow's milk. Lucky trips became shorter and less frequent. All around the land prospered. Even the oldest could not recall a better harvest. In Hearthfire, Josiah birthed a beautiful baby girl with silver hair, but eyes of cornflower blue. Lucky held his child, and joy radiated from him, so that he seemed to burn with a white fire. And that, ladies and gentlemen, was King Edward, Part 9. So, that is the end of today's bonus episode. In the next bonus episode, which will be tomorrow, we will be reading King Edward Part 10, 11, and 12, which will finish out the King Edward series. So, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in the next episode. Goodbye.